instead of being primarily reactive, as many of us are today, I think we'll get to the point where we can be primarily proactive and then still have these reactionary measures that we can use, when you need it.
Coming up, we are talking to Michael Key, the CEO and co-founder of Impello Biosciences.
All right, Ty, it's the first weekend of fall, which means pumpkin patches, pumpkin spice lattes, which I know you're a big fan of. What do you got on tap for the first weekend of fall, Ty? You're looking a little bit better now that you're a few weeks removed from baby number 3 coming.
Yeah, we're 3 weeks in the newborn phase and finishing off paternity leave with a bang, Tim. I live in San Diego, as our listeners may know, and I live pretty near the Miramar Air Base. And every year about this time, they have the air show, and it is my favorite weekend of the year. When we moved to the neighborhood, there was planes flying over pretty regularly, and I love planes and stuff, so you kind of get used to the noise. It's not too bad, but then air show weekend is a whole nother ball game because they lift the restrictions on airspace over the neighborhood during air show weekend. So the planes are literally flying like right over our house. And the Blue Angel show every year is my favorite thing in the world because they fly directly over our house. Like I can throw a golf ball and hit the bottom of a Blue Angel flying over. I would never do that, of course. This is just for representation purposes, but it is awesome. So yeah, what we're going to do with the newborn, that's a little tricky. We got him headphones. He'll be staying inside.
Yeah, newborn with a jet flying over your house, that might interrupt some sleep time. But the air show down there is awesome. I went to college in San Diego, and it was definitely a big highlight checking it out. I've been telling you, Ty, there's a nighttime show. You got to make it out at some point where they do kind of afterburners, like when it's pitch black. It's pretty sweet.
I'll have to check that out. But we've had people, friends, family, go to the air show on the grounds and then go to our air show at our house. In our house, the show is better. It's unquestionable, Tim, and that you got to make it down next year.
Ty, one last question for you. What's your favorite plane?
For sure, the B-2 bomber.
B-2 is sick. I'm kind of I'm an F-35 guy. They are so sick in person.
Totally. And I also, the old planes, I was a big B-17 guy.
For classics, our grandpa built B-17s in World War II. So if you're going historical planes, B-17, the Flying Fortress, that's the winner.
But all in all, I am like just all in on the Blue Angels. I might have shared this on the podcast last year, but my daughters last year for Halloween were Blue Angel pilots. There was the first female pilot ever was like on the last 2-year rotation. So I don't know if there's one this year. I need to look it up, but they were super inspired by a girl being on the Blue Angel team. So we are big Blue Angel fans in this household.
I can't wait for my daughters to be that age. Mason wants to be a snake for Halloween, so I'm trying to avoid that at all costs.
All right, guys, we're going to jump into this episode with Michael. This is a great entrepreneurial story. This is quintessential, the Modern Acre podcast, talking about his building and journey of building Impello Biosciences. He gets into the whole journey and what's been hard, how they've innovated, how they're thinking about growing the business that I think is relevant for every entrepreneur in the ag space. So hope you guys enjoy this episode. But first, a word from our sponsor. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by American Ag Credit. American Ag Credit is a proud member of the Farm Credit System, which was created more than 100 years ago with the sole purpose of serving the financial needs of farmers and ranchers. From small farms to the largest agribusiness enterprises, American Ag Credit understands agriculture and how to structure customized financial solutions. Just like many of the guests we have on the pod, American Ag Credit recognizes that the evolution of agriculture is inevitable and exciting. Their goal is to be at the forefront of this evolution, partnering with producers to grow their future in ways they haven't imagined yet. To learn more about American Ag Credit and to receive exclusive access to reports from Terrain, a research and insight service of American Ag Credit, visit agloan.com/terrain or hit the link in our show notes. Hey, Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim. Thanks for having me, Tyler.
Excited to dig into biologicals. Let's start there. Mike, you told us before we jumped on, you think that biological adoption is going to go faster. Be very aggressive in the adoption of biologicals. Dig into that. love to talk about that. Like, are biologicals actually going to overtake traditional inputs?
Yeah, for sure. I think that one's a matter of time, right? So where I got into what we do at Impello, but got into the biological side of the market is because I think there's a ton of opportunity with the technology, right? And biologicals are super dynamic. So the way that you're introducing biologicals into a system and then the way they're living kind of active molecules, active substances, active microbes in the system is really different. And it gives us a lot of flexibility when it comes to development. So yeah, I think over the coming, who knows, 5, 10, I don't know how many years it will take, but I think we'll get to the point where we see kind of this role reversal and a flip flop where the majority of the heavy lifting, especially on the crop protection side, is going to be done with biological products. And we're not going to do away with conventionals. I don't think that's really practical or really efficient, but they'll be reserved more for special use cases, kind of the emergency use.
I agree with you, but we're hearing like whispers, right? Like when we go to these conferences, we were at World Agritech in March, and it was like, Corteva's biological lead talking about the annual growth of the biological space. And these are like pretty staggering numbers. And if you just continue that trend line, this is one of the reasons why we felt in building Aglis, there was so much tailwinds. There's tailwinds for biologicals. Obviously, from a sustainability perspective, I think a lot of people will agree with that is, hey, if we can use a biological based product over a chemical based product, that's generally good. I think most people would agree with that. But there's also just the whole efficacy piece, right? Is that we're seeing traditional inputs have less efficacy over time. And you kind of hit on this point of biological based solutions. You kind of alluded to this idea that there's like more we can do there. Like there's more we can do. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so the biological space is tough, right? Because it started off 10, 15 years ago. The efficacy wasn't particularly high. And I think still today, there's a lot of products on the market. The efficacy is not where it should be, overpromised and then kind of the product under delivers, right? And that's not good. So I think in many ways, the technology is starting to sort itself out. There's some really reputable players in the industry now, but a lot of it comes down to these molecular, microbial, biochemical techniques and tools and different sorts of development pieces of equipment that we have available to really do a better job in the development. And it just wasn't possible 10 or 15 years ago, right? And then on the flip side, like you're saying, I mean, I'm sure somebody has a graphic of this and somebody else has thought of it, but the way that we kind of see it is like it's incredibly expensive to bring a new conventional chemistry to market, right? And the way that both through regulations and also just through efficacy of some of the traditional or older chemistries that are out there, we're basically the lifespan of these new molecules is getting shorter and shorter. Costs for the development and the registrations are going up and up, and then we kind of have this issue where you don't have as many chemistries to work with, so resistance is happening even faster, right? So all of that's like a perfect storm where it's not looking particularly attractive to develop chemistries, and frankly, it's getting harder because of all these things put together. Whereas on the biological side, it's almost the opposite. Like we're getting more efficient at producing them, we're getting much higher efficacy because of these tools that we can use. The regulations are supporting a lot of adoption of this, but I think growers also understand, the biologicals do have some, say, like off-target benefits. But what I mean by that is, you're certainly doing something to promote soil health and promote plant health in a way that is very different than with conventional products. And so we got to be careful not to compare or totally equate biologicals with conventionals because they're different. When we're looking at the trajectory, yeah, there's good reason for the big rapid growth, and as long as the efficacy is there, and the biological industry as a whole is delivering on the promises that we make, it's a very nice looking future.
Yeah, I think there's a huge piece to this time to market registration regulatory piece where on the synthetic side, there might be good materials that aren't registered for certain crops, and that crop is just a small acreage crop, and it doesn't make sense for that manufacturer to go through the hurdles to get a new crop listed. And like we run into this on our farm where there's products that might be a good fit for basil, but they're not on the label, and so we can't use those. And so there's products that are around that I think could work, but the regulatory framework makes it a little bit challenging to get all those products applied on certain crops.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, I think something we've been talking about a lot recently is just residues. And, the post-harvest market, I think there's a lot of opportunities in post-harvest and doing what we can, both, pre-harvest as the growers, but also in the pack houses to extend the lifespan, the shelf life of different produce. But it gets really difficult when you're working with the conventional chemistries, right? Whereas it seems like there's a lot more opportunity with biologicals or the softer chemistries, whether it's biochemical or biological, to extend shelf life, even improve like nutritional density and some of these things that we don't have great metrics to value right now. But there are these ancillary benefits, right? So like sounds a little weird, but if you're increasing the nutritional content or the antioxidant content in blueberries or apples, yeah, you're making a better product for the consumer. And that's something that biologicals are very good at. But there's a tangible economic benefit to the grower too, because you're improving shelf life, right? At the same time. So there's less loss, and that kind of propagates throughout the value chain, which is pretty cool.
Totally. I previously worked for Appeal, which was doing a biological coating that to extend shelf life, and like was in that space of if an apple is degrading less over time, does it have a higher nutritional content by being able to retain the vitamins that are inside? So a lot of interesting work being done there. Like when you think post harvest, are you talking about application that is happening pre harvest or being applied in a packing house or kind of neutral?
I think there's good opportunities on both sides. I mean, stuff applied in the packing house, obviously, there's maybe it's a little more specialized, but I think there's some really cool different, again, biochemical or biological based substances that, residue is not a risk. There's no allergen risk with some of these things. When you look at export markets in particular and some of the really high value crops, we have to be really careful when we think about Japan as an export market and how strict they are about residues. But for cherries and for berries, there might be some more benefits or some more opportunities to come with the true like post-harvest application side in the pack houses. But also, if we look at pre-harvest, there's quite a few biological products on the market already that have 7-day retreatment interval and a 0-day PHI, and that makes it really easy to get some, we'll say, some post-harvest benefit, even with a late application in the field.
Let's get into the story of Impello. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this space. Like, how does one, come to found a biological startup? Like, I got to know the story here.
So I went to Colorado State University and studied horticulture. And actually, I was really interested in greenhouse technology when I was getting my undergraduate degree. But I ended up working in a lab on campus called the Center for Rhizosphere Biology, which is where I was first introduced to like you could say biostimulants generally, but the lab was really focused on obviously rhizosphere biology, but that meant plant microbe and microbe interactions. So I was doing some work with different bacteria there, looking at, in particular, bacterial consortia or like groups of bacteria. And at the same time, I was working on, this is 2015, right? 2014, 2015. Hemp was just becoming a big thing in Colorado. Fortunately, those days are behind us. I think the hemp industry it's not my favorite agricultural crop, but it was really interesting industry at the time because it was a super high value. There were not very many pesticide options because of the nature of it. Nobody really knew what they were doing, but it was a very high value, very low volume industry. So, kind of one thing led to another. It became very clear that not just in hemp, but in the much larger, more legitimate, legacy ag industries, there weren't good embodiments of some of the technologies that we were working on in the lab, at our university and all over the place. And at the same time, the biological products, the most similar products you'd find on the market in any crop industry, were really based on this pretty old technology, right? And they had a bad stigma. Like they didn't work as well as they should have. They didn't work consistently, which is exactly what we were trying to address with, things like mixtures of microbe. So one thing led to another. I'd planned to and applied to the graduate program at Colorado State to get a master's and decided to defer that. Had a couple co-founders that I've known for almost my whole life and, roped them in and we decided to take the leap, start the company. Thought for sure it would fail. This was in May of 2017. And then I'd go on and go back to school. And here we are, going on 9 years later.
So yeah, talk to us about kind of how you get this off the ground. It's a lot of work. We've talked about regulatory, like how you come up with a product, have basically get through the regulatory process to bring it to market. So kind of just talk us through the early days of the company getting this propped up.
Yeah, for us early on, we started with, I'll say we were really good at like discovery, right? So took some of the initial concepts that I was working on at that lab at Colorado State, which really focused on bacillus consortium, so combinations of different bacillus species of bacteria. And we were able to find some good manufacturing partners, right? Because for a small startup that didn't raise, I mean, we didn't raise any venture capital money. So we bootstrapped the company entirely, which when you have three guys who are just out of college and willing to work for nothing, it's at least easy on the payroll side. But we didn't have a huge fund to dump into CapEx. So we focused on developing the product, the discovery level, found some good manufacturing partners, and then just quickly started selling the products. And so we bootstrapped the company for the first few years, selling mostly directly to growers, trying to get in touch. And the business model has evolved a lot since then. Of course, we wanted to get into different industries. So we've been in food crops and this, controlled environments, a little bit in ornamentals, but we've always focused on especially ag in California. I mean, when it comes to the regulatory side, we try to be really, like, we call it crop agnostic, right? So when we're focusing on roots and we're focusing on the soil microbiome and the plant's microbiome or the rhizosphere, a lot of the technology we make works on, a greenhouse tomato just as well as it does, a field grown processing tomato. So, and operating in the biostimulant space, we had a little bit of flexibility, but of course, there's a lot of complexity too. So, it wasn't quite the same sort of regulatory burden as if we were trying to register a conventional chemical with EPA. But for us, it was a really good opportunity to focus on the biostimulant part of the industry and move forward with a relatively simple product design, but one that was, I guess like more elegant, right, in its simplicity. It wasn't that it was lacking something. It's just that it makes it more applicable and less of a regulatory burden to introduce some of the products like we did.
Did you say you bootstrapped it?
Yeah, we did. So
how do you bootstrap a company like this?
Well, like I said, we didn't really pay ourselves anything initially. It was good to have some contacts in some of the industries that we were interested in, right? Like some of the high value crop industries right off the bat. So we were able to basically start the company with a product. And that was, a lot of background work. So we formally founded the company in May of 2017, but we had been setting up a lot of this relationships, both with manufacturing and customers beforehand. And so then, when we had a product ready and had some friends, I guess, who would allow unstandard payment terms, right? Like -15, it makes it a little bit easier. Slowed the growth for sure, but I think it also allowed us to control our destiny, which is really important to us.
Mike, let's dig into the portfolio a little bit and talk about kind of like the sales conversation when you're introducing your product. Is like this a one-to-one replacement? What are you replacing? What's kind of the value prop to growers that you're communicating?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think for us, like, actually, we talk a lot about innovation on the product side, but I think really there's a lot of innovation in terms of how we're introducing the products to the market, right? And that's almost more challenging because no, for most of our products, we don't try to do a one-to-one replacement, right? Like, I don't think we've found any success. I don't know of anybody who's found very much success with like our nitrogen fixing consortium product called Comans. Works really well, fixes nitrogen, but the pitch is not that you should replace conventional nutrition with this biological fertilizer. We see a lot of growers maintain their standard fertilization practice, incorporate something like the nitrogen fixer, and see increases in quality or increases in yield or both. Some of the guys, whether from regulations or for otherwise, will then take the opportunity to experiment with backing off some of the conventional nutrition, right? Or with some of our other products, see how it plays with their IPM strategy and if they can tank mix the product and if it has some sort of synergistic effect. But yeah, we're never really approaching it with like a replacement. I think we look at all of our portfolio and a lot of biological products as more of a like new tools, right? Different tools in the tool chest. And yeah, the danger is trying to equate it to a conventional product because, biologicals, just generally speaking, are so much better as preventative products rather than curative. And that's a different mindset than like a conventional fungicide that you don't necessarily think of the same way.
And so do you think, circling back to our original conversation, do you think that that's going to change over time where there's going to be more one-to-one replacements? Or, yeah, how do you think about that evolution if we're going to replace a lot of the chemical inputs or traditional inputs?
Yeah. On the nutrition side, I think it's really difficult, right? Like replacing nitrogen is tough. So it's a little bit easier for me to answer that in terms of crop protection. I think if we, and a lot of people are already doing this, right? Adopting a more biological approach. You call it whatever you want, right? But the idea is that you're promoting plant health very early on and trying to maintain plant health so that you don't have to fix a problem, which is always better, right? So I don't still see that as a one-to-one replacement of like biological products for chemical products. It's almost or I should say conventional products, right? Because it's almost just a different way to approach the problem where I think we'll maintain plant health better, and you can maintain plant health pretty robustly as a biological systems approach. But then you still have the conventional chemistries that you can come in with when you need that kind of spot curative effect, right? More of a reaction than a proactive approach. So I think there's still a place for that, but instead of being primarily reactive, as many of us are today, I think we'll get to the point where we can be primarily proactive and then still have these reactionary measures that we can use, when you need it.
Yeah, Tim and I have talked about this a lot, but basically the correlation to the human health, right, and plant health. And we've seen this trend. I'm participating in the trend of trying to understand what my biomarkers are and to add in supplements that will help be more proactive about my biomarkers. And that feels related to the biological space, right? If growers can, hey, we're going to make the plant health better so that we don't have these long term implications or consequences. Having some health issue in 20 years that I need strong medication for, like, heck yeah, sign me up. But I'm going to try to do everything I can in the short term and now to be as healthy as possible to limit the need. So I see a lot of parallels to that.
Right. Yeah. It's like, we talk a lot about, to people who don't know anything about agriculture or what we do at Impello, our generic response is like, we make probiotics for plants, right? Which is not really true. But it's a decent analogy. And it's kind of like, yeah, nobody wakes up in the morning and just takes an antibiotic, for general like maintenance of themselves, right? Now people are waking up and taking a probiotic. And if you get a severe bacterial infection or something, the probiotic's not going to cure it. So that's the time for an antibiotic, right? It's the right medication at the right time, kind of like the 4 Rs in the fertilizer world. I think, yeah, it makes perfect sense, like to apply that same logic to ag. And we see it all the time, right? You look at your gut, and there's E. coli and salmonella just in everybody's gut all the time. The issue is when it gets out of whack. And again, you can have these purely reactionary measures to kind of wipe the slate clean and then start over. But I think most of the time, if we're spending a little bit more of our resources trying to maintain what we would call, the really nerdy term, is like a eubiotic system where you have a balance, and there might be some pathogens in the soil or something, but they're at a level that's effectively irrelevant. They're not getting out of whack. Trying to maintain that is a lot easier than just constantly nuking the soil and hoping for the best.
Mike, you've been at this for almost 10 years now. You started in 2017, so you've been at it for a while. Like, what are the long-term goals for the company? Like, how are you thinking about kind of growth or exit opportunities? Like in the space you're in currently, how are you thinking about positioning the company for long-term success?
Well, I guess I have the luxury of still being, I feel pretty young. I don't know, sometimes I feel old, but I've got no ambition, and same thing with my co-founders, Adam DeRosa in particular, who's active day to day, but our other co-founder, Eric. We're all about the same age. And I think we started this with the idea that there was a lot of work to be done, a lot of opportunity in the biological space, but a lot of work to be done, and a very rapid rate of development, both on the tools that we use, which translates to rapid rate of development of products like ours. So there's no real urgency for us to try to exit or something like that. I think on the flip side, the thing that we've always been most kind of maniacally urgent about is getting more people to adopt the products, right? Which is in kind of sharp contrast to the reality, which is that you need to be incredibly patient when you're introducing new technologies, especially in an industry like, the long-term goal is again to get adoption of these types of products in as many different crop industries as we can, because I think ultimately, fundamentally speaking, it's the direction that the whole industry is moving, right? We would like to see obviously our products there, as long as we're leading on the quality front, on the efficacy front, on all the things that are important to us, and adding value to the grower. So however we can do that, for us, it looks a lot like working with more retailers, working with more distributors. Education is a huge part for us. So trying to do things like this, come on a podcast, get people more familiar with the idea of both biological products, but also how it's fundamentally moving in a direction. And I think if you think about it, we're tomorrow, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there are going to be more better biological products on the market. That's something that we'd like to be a part of and continue contributing to, right?
Mike, we're going to shift gears here a little bit. would love your take kind of on the industry at large. What's your ag hot take? Maybe a contrarian opinion you have in the space.
Man, I think probably a little bit of what I just said. Like if we look at, it's a hard thing to imagine right now. Very simply put, I imagine that sooner or later we're going to see a role reversal, right? We're going to see more biological products used as a proportion of all the inputs than we will conventional products. Conventional as we define them right now. That doesn't mean by any means that we're going to get rid of the conventional products. I think there's always going to be a place for conventional nutrition, conventional chemistries, crop protection side. But, and I would like to be bullish about it. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think it's just a matter of time until we have crossed that kind of that tipping point. And biologicals aren't looked at as some sort of niche use case or kind of specialty product that you use only on occasion, whereas you do the vast majority of your program is built around conventional inputs. I think we're going to see that switch. And again, it's really hard for a lot of people to believe right now. I think it's hard to even imagine how it would work given like the infrastructure that's built into our industry and our genetics that we're working with and all these issues. But again, it's a fundamental. You think about it fundamentally, it's like we have a ton of opportunity to rapidly advance the biological side, biological types of products. By nature, they're very dynamic, right? Versus a more static type of chemistry. And all the headwinds, I guess, or all the tailwinds, I should say, are kind of pushing in the direction of more biologicals. So as difficult as it can be to imagine that right now, I think that's going to happen again, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. On our farm, I'd say probably 70% conventional products, 30% biological based. And you could easily see that in the next 5-10 years flipping, and being majority biological with the balance being conventional products that you use situationally that you need. And I think it's to your point, like it's going to be a system where both exist. I don't think there's a world where it's like everything is biological. It's this utopia. Like you're always going to have both, and yeah, for certain use cases. And so I think that's the right level-headed approach. Mike, one last thing I wanted to hit on. You mentioned kind of urgency around sales, like that being challenging in ag. Like what kind of tactics or strategies are you using as CEO to like really go grow sales? Like Ty and I talk about this a lot, whether it's Polaris, the company he's CEO of, or with AgList or the farm, like different sales strategies in ag. Like what are you doing specifically to kind of help move the needle there?
Yeah, for us, we've always been a very technical company, right? We try to maintain that. So we don't like the wheeling and dealing necessarily. I think it's a little tough because when we look at how we get adoption of our products, like ultimately when people use them and they see that there's efficacy, it's a pretty good sales hit. But education is such a critical part of this. So like our sales staff is pretty unique in that we have people who are operating very much on the technical side, but also effectively our account managers, right? So they're both doing the technical support and selling. And that's really hard to find good people. I mean, we have a great sales team that's very skilled at that. I think gaining trust with customers, especially with there's 1,000 biological or biostimulant companies or something out there right now. It's difficult to differentiate. It's difficult to establish trust, especially if customers have been burned with other products in the past. So for us, I mean, being really transparent, kind of showing the data, like we're very data driven and everyone says that. I think we're different in that sense, but taking the time to effectively meet the grower where they're at and understand if there's any reluctance or opposition to using the products or trying the products, how to work around that. That's a huge part of our sales strategy. And it's not a one size fits all approach. Of course, it's not for anyone. But if we can at least get the conversation, kind of understand and work with the grower, again, to address their specific challenges, we find pretty good success with that. So then it's a question of scalability, right? Working with retail partners and distribution partners who are technical enough and savvy enough to not lose the important messages and important parts of our product pitches along the way.
Awesome. Well, Mike, we appreciate you. We appreciate you guys and your adoption of AgList. I think your Impello product, your Comans product that you mentioned is the number 4 or 5th product on AgList, which is super exciting. But other than checking out your AgList profile, how can our listeners get in touch and connect with you and everything you're doing at Impello?
For sure. Well, let me just say, AgList is, we're super happy that you guys created that. I mean, it's a really cool thing to be a part of. The only problem right now is that we're number 4 or 5. So the objective is to get all the products number 1 in their categories, right? But yeah, thank you guys for putting that together. So AgList is a great place to learn a little bit about the products. Check out our website, impellobio.com. And then we've got sales reps kind of across the country. Specifically, we've got agronomists in Salinas and Monterey area, and then Fresno if you're out in California. So you can reach out to your retailer, preferred distributor, and we're probably working with them.
Sounds good. Thanks for being with us, Mike.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate the time.
So, Ty, what do you think of that conversation with Michael?
It's just so inspiring to hear these stories, bootstrapping businesses and just grinding through those early days, no salaries, and just trying to make something happen. And we heard that today, and it just gets me pumped up about entrepreneurship and business, and really cool to see Impello's journey and see where they go. I mean, I think we've talked about it recently with the mixing bowl guys, right? Like how M&A is going to materialize in the biological sector. I think it's a very fragmented industry, so it'll be interesting to follow. I think Impello's done a great job of building that moat, right? Of a good brand, good product, distribution, and I think an opportunity for others to follow them.
Well, guys, hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'll be back next week with another fresh episode.